Hi everyone, this is Marc Zawel. I'm the co-founder of AcceptU. Happy to have you all here today for our Beat the GMAT webinar on successfully building a bridge to an MBA for all those engineers who are looking to apply to top business schools. Before I jump into the presentation, I just wanted to make two quick announcements. The first is this presentation is available for download off of the AcceptU website. The link is up there on your screen, learnmore.acceptu.com/engineer. If you're viewing this live now, if you're viewing this recorded in the future, please feel free to jump over to our website and download the presentation. Hopefully those of you that are viewing this live, you can now focus on the presentation. You don't have to worry about taking a lot of notes. And if you do have questions that come up over the course of this presentation, please chat them over, and we'll set aside some time at the end to answer as many of those as possible. The other quick announcement is just regarding AcceptU and the admissions assessment that we are going to be offering all of those of you who are either viewing this webinar live or viewing a recording in the future. All of our MBA admissions assessments are with AcceptU's team of former MBA admissions officers. We can give you great feedback on your candidacy, give you some tips on improving your candidacy, coming across more compelling in your application materials, and you can sign up for those admissions assessments at learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. Just to jump into the presentation and give you a little bit of background on AcceptU, we are an MBA admissions counseling group comprised entirely of former admissions officers from top 25 business schools. Our counselors provide one-on-one virtual support by phone, Skype, and email, giving hundreds of applicants a real competitive advantage in this process and place them into the business schools of their choice. More than 90% of our past clients have been accepted to one of their top 3 choices. To give you a little bit of background on myself and our team, I'm the co-founder of AcceptU. I'm also the author of an admissions guidebook called Untangling the Ivy League that focused on gaining admission ultimately allows applicants to differentiate themselves and get admitted. So today we're going to be focusing on MBA strategy for engineers. So we've broken down the presentation into 5 sections. The first is defining an engineer and where engineers are looking to go to business school. The next section we're going to focus more on why an MBA is right for engineers. And we're going to talk a bit about advancing your career, maybe changing your career, or starting your career post business school. Next, we're going to talk about the positive attributes of engineers, and I want to focus more from an admission standpoint, of course. What are admissions officers valuing most from engineers in terms of their quantitative skills, their critical thinking, team mindset? If you have an understanding of what admissions officers value from your prior experience, it's going to allow you to better position yourself to show a fit with the school and also differentiate yourself from applicants that don't necessarily have those same qualities or attributes as you do as an engineer. The next section is going to focus more on overcoming weaknesses. We've identified some of the most common weaknesses among engineer applicants, things like lack of or poor verbal or written skills, perhaps a lower GPA, an uneven GMAT score, and we'll talk about how do you address potential weaknesses in your application. The final section that we're going to talk about is the best business schools for engineers. So I want to talk about programs that typically attract engineers as well as programs that don't, and perhaps how that's going to factor into the strategy around which business schools you apply to. So let's start with that first section on who is an engineer and where do engineers typically go to business school? As many of you are likely aware, engineers are typically one of, if not the most represented undergraduate degree among MBA applicants. What we did is we went on to Beat the GMAT, MBA Watch. We looked at, these are self-reported numbers from last year. So obviously we're going to take them with a grain of salt, so to speak. But on average, 30 to 40% of students are coming from engineering or tech backgrounds. So when you look at MBA programs like Stanford, Harvard, Northwestern, Chicago, NYU, all falling 30, 40, 45% of applicants are coming from engineering or from tech backgrounds. So when you think about it from an admissions standpoint, admissions officers are looking to build diverse and well-rounded classes. And diversity can take many forms, and we'll talk more about this later on in the presentation. But one form is the undergraduate degree of incoming students. And so if you have, on average, 30 to 40% of students coming from, say, an engineering or tech background, it's going to be the most represented undergraduate degree, and it's going to be perhaps a little bit more competitive for those applicants that are coming from that type of background. Why do engineers love business school? Why are applicants with engineering or tech backgrounds the most represented applicant, or excuse me, why are engineers the most represented undergraduate degree in the applicant pool? We found that engineers are drawn to business school for three reasons. First is that a career in engineering can in some ways pigeonhole you. You're a little bit more limited in terms of what your long-term career opportunities are. And business school in many ways can expand your horizons and also offer more opportunities, allow you to apply your skills in other career areas beyond those typical engineering careers. Second is thinking about your skills and competencies as an engineer, and kind of tying into that first reason why engineers are drawn to business school is that the skills that you've developed as an engineer can have a real impact and application in business-related careers like finance or consulting. And so you're going to get a little bit more diversity in terms of the areas that your skills can be applied to, the impact that you can have, and the industry as well as the functional role that you're going to be filling within your career. Finally, the personal qualities of engineers, things like creativity, certain innovation, they are really relevant and they're valued quite highly in a business setting. Perhaps they're valued even more so in a business setting than they are valued in, say, a more traditional engineering career. So you've got these three factors at play. You have this idea of engineering careers being really limiting, business opening up opportunities to you, thinking about your skills or your competencies as being applicable outside of a typical engineering career, and then thinking about the personal qualities being really relevant and also valued in business settings. That's why we have found engineers are typically applying to MBA programs. So we now have a sense of really who are engineers and what are the schools that they're targeting, and we've talked a little bit about why engineers are going to business school. Next topic that we're going to be discussing is why an MBA is right for engineers. And in particular, we're going to talk about advancing your career, changing your career, or starting a new career. And by starting a new career, I mean becoming an entrepreneur or going to work for a startup company. First, that first category, career advancement. And it's worth noting also before I jump into career advancement, career change, or starting a new career that some of this is quite specific to engineers, but some of this is more broadly applicable to building a strategy for your MBA applications in coming from areas that are not necessarily engineering related. But for those engineers that are looking to advance careers, And thinking about practicing engineers, for example, if you're coming from a chemical or an environmental background or perhaps a lab, if your career has stagnated in that engineering field and you feel like there's a need for enhanced skills to grow, and by growth I mean either moving to kind of a next managerial level or to grow in terms of the functional role that you're playing. If you're right now being kind of more specifically utilized on the engineering side and you want to have more of an impact on the business side, you're going to need to develop and expand upon the foundational skills, things like accounting, finance, communication, leadership and management, in order to really accelerate your career in the engineering industry. Business school also for engineers that are looking to advance their career in the engineering field is a great opportunity to further build their professional network. And when you look at the benefits of going to business school and you talk to applicants about why they're applying to business school, there is often an interest in expanding or enhancing quantitative skills, further kind of enhancing qualitative skills, whether that's communication, leadership, management, presentation. But then there's also these other benefits of going to business school, probably the most important of which is professionally networking and growing your professional network. And when you talk to graduates of top MBA programs, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years out, they'll often cite their professional network as one of the most important assets that they continue to draw upon from their business school experience. Or it's a combination of all these things for those looking to advance their career. That's kind of the first category of engineers that are looking to pursue an MBA. It's career advancement. The second category is career change, and actually among all MBA applicants, the majority are looking to change their careers. And when we talk about changing careers, we're talking about either an industry change or a functional role change, or both. You might be looking to go from one industry to another industry. You might be looking to stay within an industry but change your functional role within that industry, or you might be looking to change your industry as well as your function. If you have typically some practical or consulting experience or even academic experience and you're looking to explore a new career track, you have to build some new competencies and skills in order to make this career change. If you're going from one industry to another industry, business school is really your opportunity, whether it's in more of an academic setting in the classroom or through a more experiential opportunity through a summer internship, to learn more about that industry and ensure that you have that industry knowledge that's going to allow you to make this type of career change. Similarly, if you're looking to change your functional role, both in the classroom as well as during a summer internship, you'll be able to think and explore different functional roles. Maybe you have an interest in marketing, maybe you have an interest in sales, maybe you're interested in operations, maybe you're interested in more finance, whatever that interest is. Business school is really the only opportunity that you have to make this type of career change by building skills and then by building your network and leveraging career services and the various other resources that are going to be available to you in order to make this career change. In terms of where you can go, in our experience, engineers are looking primarily at two areas. The first is finance, whether that's on the finance, the quant side, or more on the operational side, or the other area that seems to be quite popular is operations or supply chain management. But I will admit that there are many, many engineers that are also looking for something completely different. As I mentioned before, marketing, sales, consulting, general management, real estate, entrepreneurship. Really where you're changing careers is less important in the application process than being able to justify it. And we'll talk more a little bit further in the presentation about what you can do to justify your interests in changing careers, because you can't just pull this new career out of a hat. You need to be able to point to things either professionally or personally that indicate why you are interested in changing careers and why you're interested in changing careers to that particular career track that you're indicating an interest in. The last category is you're looking to start your own career. And this has become what we found here at AcceptU increasingly popular over the last couple of years, especially in this economic climate, is that there are many, many more MBA applicants that are indicating an interest in entrepreneurship, whether that's in starting their own business or joining a startup. And I'll talk a little bit more about the pluses and minuses of going this route, but technology startups in particular, they do need employees that understand both the technical as well as the business side of the equation. And certainly as former engineers, you have that technical competency, and then through an MBA, you should hopefully be able to build on the business competency as well. We've seen functional roles such as biz dev, product development, product management as quite popular among former engineers. Now, in terms of pluses and minuses of going this route versus going either career acceleration or a hard career change, certainly with an interest in entrepreneurship, there's an opportunity to differentiate yourself, because although it has become increasingly popular, it's certainly not as popular as the traditional career tracks like management consulting or finance. So if you know that admissions officers are looking to build these diverse classes of students with their future career goals, and you're interested in an area that is typically underrepresented, there is some means of differentiation if you do indicate an interest in entrepreneurship. With that said, before you go about and say, I want to become an entrepreneur, keep in mind that there's also a potential minus in saying that you have an interest in going this route, because goals are attainable, it's not going to help you in the process no matter how differentiated your goals are. So if you do want to go this route, you want to proactively address these potential concerns by indicating that you understand that this is going to be
Mark.
more of like a self-initiated job search. And that, yes.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. This is Jennifer. I believe for maybe just the past minute or so, you were cut out in the audio. We couldn't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so maybe I'll just take a step back.
All right, thank you.
Sorry about that. So I just wanted to recoup, because I think that there might have been take a step back because I think there might have been an issue with the audio. But in terms of entrepreneurship and indicating an interest in entrepreneurship and coming from an engineering background, certainly technology startups need employees that understand both the technical as well as the business side of the equation. We've seen that those former engineers who are going into or taking a more entrepreneurial direction are filling roles like business development or product development or project management. But as with all things in the MBA admissions process, there's pluses and minuses of going the entrepreneurial route. The potential plus side is that unlike, say, management consulting or finance, there's much more of a means of differentiation. Finance, management consulting, two of the most popular post-MBA career paths, and it's a little bit more difficult to stand out if you indicate an interest in one of those two areas. there are far fewer students that are interested in entrepreneurship. It is a growing number, but it's certainly a minority. So you can, in some ways, differentiate yourself from other applicants if you indicate an interest in going the entrepreneurial route. With that said, before you go ahead and do so, recognize that there are some potential red flags in going this more entrepreneurial route. In particular, business schools want to ensure that your goals are going to be attainable, that your goals are realistic, given your prior work experience and interest. So if you do say that you want to go more of this entrepreneurial route, make sure that you can point to things in your either personal or professional past that show why you're interested in going the more entrepreneurial route, and or be sure to, in your application materials, address some of those potential red flags. Say things like, I understand that there might not be the same level of support from career services in pursuing an entrepreneurial career goal, but here's why it doesn't matter. Because I am going to be able to do this on my own, because I've already built a network, because I already know potential employers, I've already had conversations with potential employers. Proactively address some of those concerns that they might have. And then going this entrepreneurial direction can be a real differentiation from other engineer applicants. So we talked about why an MBA is right for engineers and the difference between advancing, changing, or starting your own career. Next, I want to jump into some of the positive attributes of engineers among business school admissions officers. And what we've found, and this is based on our experience and our counselors' experience working in admissions at these top business schools, is that typically admissions officers, when evaluating engineers, are highlighting 3 qualities or attributes that they see as the most favorable attributes of that applicant. Things like quantitative skills, critical thinking, and then group and team projects. So we're going to take a couple of minutes now just to go a little bit deeper into these 3 qualities and talk specifically about these qualities such that you can highlight these qualities in your application materials. If you know that admissions officers value these qualities, and now you do know that they value these qualities, certainly play them up, because although you're coming from one of the most represented undergraduate degrees as an engineer or coming from a tech background, the admissions officers are obviously looking favorably upon this group of applicants because they have these qualities that are valued in a business school setting. So you want to try to play up these qualities in your application materials, in your essays, in your resume, in your interviews, perhaps in your letters of recommendation, but you don't want to go overboard. You need to think about you need to think really strategically about your MBA applications and the role that each of these pieces is going to play in support of your candidacy. Meaning your essays are going to be playing one piece, your letters of recommendation might be playing another piece, your resume is playing a third piece, your interview is playing a fourth piece. How are all these pieces going to fit together? You don't want there to be too much overlap or redundancy, if any, between these pieces, because it really is a wasted opportunity not to be showing admissions officers another side of who you are. You also don't want to go overboard with emphasizing these qualities or attributes because you're applying for an MBA, not a master's in engineering. So always be thinking about application of these skills. Possessing these skills and building these skills, how is this going to be beneficial to you in a business school setting or in your future career? That's really the piece that you need to tie together. The goal of the application process for whether you're coming from an engineering background or not is to very clearly demonstrate to admissions officers how your past experience and an MBA from their program will help you achieve your short-term and your long-term career goals. And it sounds very simplistic to boil it down to that level, but it's amazing how many applicants don't really understand this. And if you don't understand this, you're going to have a very difficult time coming across in a compelling way that demonstrates fit with that business school. And if you're not able to do that, you're going to have a very, very difficult time in this process. Let's go into each of these 3 qualities or attributes a little bit deeper to give you some sense of what should be played up in your application materials. The first are the quant skills. So thinking about either your professional or your academic past. Academically, thinking about the relevant coursework that you've taken that can demonstrate real quantitative or analytical proficiency, courses like physics or advanced math or computer science. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, you need to tie this coursework into business school coursework. I mean, taking and doing really well in physics, but not being able to explain how physics is going to be applicable to you, excuse me, in other classes like finance or statistics or accounting or economics, or your career interests, it doesn't really matter. So it's all in support of the story. Where are you going with your career? Where are you today? How is an MBA going to be the bridge that helps you get there? Now, your background with this, with proficiency in these academic courses is one way to start to build a case for admission and for why you're interested in what you say that you're interested in. The other way that you can back this up with your quantitative skills is by talking about your professional accomplishments. So when you look at engineers or former engineers, think about their problem-solving abilities, intellectual curiosity, level of innovativeness, creativity, strategic decision-making. A big one is analysis and interpretation of large amounts of data. That's a big, I mean, having that type of skill can be quite beneficial to you in business school. And then how does this all tie into your career interests, and how does this all tie into being successful in an MBA program? Next, we'll talk about critical thinking. Typically, engineers follow a very methodical way in approaching problems, whether those problems were in problem sets academically while an undergraduate student or in their careers. Identifying and fully defining the problem, analyzing the problem, and solving a problem. How is this type of methodology around critical thinking and problem solving applicable to business school? Can it be applied? Well, I would say yes, it can, but it needs to be changed in some ways. Talk about how your critical thinking and this approach that you take to problem solving is going to benefit you not just in business school but in your future career. Start to draw the comparisons for admissions officers so that they understand how you have already started to build upon some of the skills that you're going to need in order to be successful. This last point ties into what was discussed on that previous slide, which is distilling takeaways from analyzing and understanding large and or complex amounts of data. This is a good example of being able to connect your previous skills or your qualities and apply them to business school. So with complex amounts of data and distilling key takeaways from this large amount of data, that's directly applicable to business school case studies, and most of the top business schools, if not all of them, utilize in some capacity, some more than others, of course, the case method. So if you're working primarily with cases where you're presented with a large amount of data and you have to really cut to the chase and understand what's important, the fact that you've already started to develop this skill of critical thinking, whether as an undergraduate, academically, or in your career, is going to be very beneficial to you. And so that's just one example of how you can kind of draw these parallels and comparisons. And then you probably want to take it another step further, which is, okay, case studies will be having this skill set will having this skill set will be helpful to you in business school, but how do you take it a step further and show admissions officers how this will be helpful and applicable to a real-world situation in your future career? The last quality is teamwork and group projects. And it's likely as an undergraduate student you had experience working in teams and for whether it was study groups, whether it was on problem sets, whatever it may have been. This is actually pretty unique. If you talk to old classmates of yours who were humanities majors, like for example, I was a history major at Cornell, there was very little, if any, group work. All of our assignments as humanities majors were largely independent. We didn't do a heck of a lot as in teams. Also, it's likely that in your career as an engineer, your job has been driven by a lot of team and group projects, team goals, things of this nature. Business school is driven a lot by group work. Typically, what we found is that even for your entry-level first-year courses, you might have between 20 up to 50% of your grade dependent on your group work. So because you've had experience both academically as well as professionally, you will be in a stronger position to really hit the ground running in business school, and you'll be able to relate it to the real world. In most companies today, there's less emphasis on individual performance and much more so on group and team performance. So kind of the bottom line with this, this quality is you want to emphasize as much as possible your team and your group work. And if you've had leadership experience, that's certainly a plus as well. We talked about the good. Let's talk a little bit about the bad. In the same way that there are some positive attributes among engineer applicants, there are some potentially negative attributes as well. And so let's jump into some of the most common weaknesses we see in engineering applicants, and then talk about how you can properly address them in your application materials. So we'll start with these pertain to you. If you just try to ignore them or hope
Hello,
that
Mark.
admissions office, yeah.
I apologize for interrupting again. It looks like sound cut out.
Not sure why that keeps happening.
Yeah, can you double check your audio settings?
Yeah, I haven't touched them. It's weird. Yeah, it says built-in microphone. Is that?
Okay.
Never had that happen before. It's weird.
All right, well, hopefully it doesn't occur again. If so, I'll just let you know.
I apologize. I'm not sure if that's on my end or if it's an issue with our connection or what it is. It's weird. Never had the problem before.
Okay, well, if you can just probably repeat maybe just your last couple of statements. I think you cut out just for a few seconds.
Okay. Definitely let me know if it cuts out again. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's happening, but
I definitely will. Thanks, Mark.
We'll get it sorted out. Just to back up, and I apologize for the audio issues that we're having with this presentation, but hopefully it'll be the last of it. But if it does cut out again, definitely give us a shout so that we can back up and go through what potentially was missed. But with these possible weaknesses for engineers, whether it's communication, written skills, lower GPA, or uneven GMAT distribution, it's really important that you proactively address these red flags if they pertain to you. Many applicants try to brush them under the rug, so to speak. They think that if they don't really address them, then admissions officers will overlook them. But admissions officers will not overlook them. And if you don't actively address them and provide explanation for them, admissions officers will draw their own conclusions. And trust me, the conclusions that admissions officers are going to draw on their own are not going to be favorable or more favorable than the explanations that you provide for potential weaknesses in your application. It's all about owning this story and telling the story the way that you want to tell it, not the way that admissions officers want to hear it. And so with that said, talk a little bit about these three potential red flags or weaknesses and what you can do to proactively address them if they pertain to you. The first is weak communication skills. There's an assumption that as an engineer you probably have weaker communication skills, whether that's oral or written. And this can be a potential red flag for admissions officers. What you can do to counteract this is have really, really strong essays or interviews to prove yourself as not having weak communication skills. You can have as high of a GMAT verbal score as possible. If you're not able to have as high of a verbal score as possible, if you don't think that your essays are really representative of your communication skills, then try to tie in some of your personal interests. The goal here is to become less of a stereotypical engineer applicant. If you talk about who you are outside of work and maybe some of your personal interests or hobbies or extracurricular activities, maybe admissions officers view you less as that stereotypical engineer that they might be viewing you as now. And if you come across as more real and likable, even if you have weaker communication skills, admissions officers won't necessarily have you fall into that typical engineer stereotype. If you have a lower GPA, and the reality is that many engineers do have lower GPAs than the average incoming student at top business schools, you may view this as a red flag, and admissions officers may view it as a red flag as well. The reality is that there's nothing that you can do about this. But you need to keep in mind that admissions officers do not just consider your GPA. And this is a mistake that many, many applicants fall into. No fault of their own, but when they're looking at potential business schools to apply to, and they look at the average GPA of an incoming student, they compare that immediately to their own. And they say, well, my GPA is below that of the average incoming student, or my GPA is average, or my GPA is above. But admissions officers don't just look at a number as an indicator of whether that student is academically qualified to be admitted to their program, because your GPA is different than another applicant's GPA, which is different than another applicant's GPA. You likely attended different universities, you had different majors, you took different courses. So a 3.5 from one applicant can be very, very different than a 3.5 from another applicant. And as an engineer, admissions officers recognize that your coursework is typically more rigorous and is likely going to result in a lower GPA simply by the coursework that you are engaged in. So don't worry too much about that GPA, assuming you did as well as you could in the courses that you took, because admissions officers are going to take into account how rigorous the courses were and how rigorous of a university you attended. Keep in mind also that perceived weaknesses, in this case maybe your GPA, in your application, they can be compensated for by strengths in others. So if your GPA is a little bit lower than the average incoming student, then have really strong essays, have really strong letters of recommendation, have a stronger GMAT score than the average incoming student, prove yourself in other ways. Admissions officers review applicants in a holistic way, meaning that they look at the entire applicant profile, they look at the entire application package. And so you're not going to be rejected on your GPA alone, assuming it's within range. If your GPA is significantly lower than the average incoming student, then it's likely that even having exceptional other pieces of your application will not make a difference in terms of your overall chances of admission. You need to clear a certain benchmark, but ultimately, assuming you clear that benchmark, your GPA alone is not going to determine whether you get admitted or rejected by these top business schools. It's going to be the other qualitative pieces of your application, like your essays, like your letters of recommendation, like your resume, like your interview. That's going to be really the piece. And it's all going to tie into your career interests, your career goals, your story, your strategy around differentiation, which is why we spent a lot of time in the beginning of this presentation focusing on those pieces as well. As an engineer, you potentially also have an uneven GMAT score in terms of your breakdown between the quant versus the verbal and the writing. Potentially a red flag. What can you do to counteract this? You can retake the GMAT. Beyond that, there's really not much, if anything, you can do. But keep in mind, again, that like your GPA, admissions officers often expect this. They expect you to have a lower verbal and writing score given your strengths in other areas. If you have a more balanced score, that's great. All the more power to you, and certainly that will be looked very favorably upon by admissions officers. But if you don't, and there are many applicants that have somewhat lopsided scores, that's okay too. If your verbal and your writing section is low and you're also an international applicant, you might potentially raise some red flags around your English language skills, in which case if you are going to be taking an exam like the TOEFL, make sure you're scoring as high as you can on that so that they recognize that you have the English competency and the skills to excel in their program. If your verbal or your writing section is low and you're also a domestic applicant, play up your verbal writing skills in other parts of your application. You know that your application is going to be reviewed holistically, so maybe you can talk about in your job or in your career, here's ways that I've really built upon or enhanced my verbal or my writing skills, so that admissions officers can rest assured that you have, at a minimum, a working competency to be successful in their program. But remember, as with the GPA, the GMAT is only one piece of your application. So don't let this be something that really bogs you down and in the application process. Keep in mind that they're going to be looking at that entire package, and it's all about thinking about how all these pieces tie together and how strategically can you play each of these pieces to your greatest advantage in order to improve your chances of getting accepted to these highly selective business schools. The last topic that we're going to be covering are the best business schools for engineers. And we're not going to talk specifically about examples of business schools, but I want you to be thinking about differentiation, programs that are attracting engineers versus programs that aren't. Although, based on that first section of this presentation, most business schools are attracting a lot of engineers. So here are the various scenarios that you'll typically fall into. Should you apply to business schools that attract a lot of engineer applicants? If you do apply to those business schools that are attracting many engineer applicants, maybe there's a reason why so many engineers apply. Maybe there's something about that program that's a good fit for former engineers. And if so, what is it? Dig into these programs, research these programs, see what they really value. We've talked at a very high level about some of the qualities and attributes that admissions officers might be finding attractive among applicants, but as you start to build your program list, look specifically at each of these schools and try to get a sense of what is it about these engineer applicants that they find so attractive. So kind of follow that crowd. Now, you might also consider business schools that don't necessarily attract as many engineer applicants. You're not going to find many top business schools that don't attract a lot, but it's a matter of on the order of, right? If the business school is attracting fewer former engineers, maybe there's a reason why. Maybe the business school doesn't value them in the same way. Maybe the business school doesn't have the right type of program for these students. Maybe it's not as good of a fit. But maybe it's because it's just not as popular of a program, in which case you have more of an opportunity to stand out. So with those two scenarios, you really can go in either direction. There's pluses and minuses to really both sides of the equation when you're considering the business schools that you're going to apply to, whether they're attracting a lot or fewer former engineer applicants. Really for us here at AcceptU, and when you approach this application process, admissions strategy, identifying programs that are the right fit. But it's also about those that are underserved by applicants like you. And as we discussed in the beginning of this presentation, there is an I would say an overrepresentation of engineer applicants. So when you are considering the schools to apply to, think also about other diversity that you might be able to bring. And we talked a little bit about that with career goals, for example. So if you're looking at entrepreneurship versus finance or management consulting, there's some diversity there and there's some opportunity for differentiation. But diversity can take many other forms, not just future career interests. You can talk about your prior career experience. You can talk about your ethnicity, your geography, your family, your upbringing, more personal interests as well. Think about what diversity you will bring to the class and try to highlight that. And doing so, I think, will help you to differentiate yourself from other engineering applicants. Keep in mind also that admissions officers and admissions offices, they don't admit well-rounded applicants. We've heard from a lot of our past clients who say, well, I don't do any community service, or I haven't done anything in my community, or any volunteer work. Is that going to be held against me? Not necessarily, as long as you've spent your time doing something else. Admissions officers, they don't need applicants that have done everything. They need applicants who have done one thing and they've done it really well. And then they'll take the students that have done that one thing really well and they'll build a class of students that in sum is very diverse and together covers the type of diversity that they're looking to build in their incoming classes. So you have to do some introspection. You have to think, who are you? What niche or role are you going to fill in the class? Hopefully it's something that not many other applicants will be able to fill. Figure this out. Spend that time. Invest that time in yourself to build your story, which is really the base of your application strategy. And later on this year, with about applying to business school as an engineer, or more generally just about the application process. Before I jump into the questions, just wanted to reiterate those two announcements from earlier when we started, which is the first, you're able to download this presentation from our website, learnmore.acceptu.com/engineer, and then I'd encourage all of you who either attended today live or who are viewing this in the future to contact us here at AcceptU to schedule an admissions assessment with one of our former admissions officers, and you can do that by visiting learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. So with that said, if there are any questions, feel free to chat them over and I'll be happy to answer as many as time allows. Here they come. So let me start with this one that just came in. It says, how does an engineer justify a stellar GMAT score above 760 but a very low AWA score? And well, first of all, kudos on the GMAT score. That's a very strong standardized test score to work off of. But an AWA score of a 4 is it's not kind of aligned at the same level as a 760 as you would expect. But as we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation, it's expected. Admissions officers are not going to be entirely surprised by this. What you want to do is play up the other parts of your background that can justify your written and your verbal skills, whether that's in your career, whether that's outside of your career, just so that they have an understanding that you're going to be okay there. You also can have really strong essays, but you have to be careful. You don't want your essays to be so strong that they raises concerns about whether those essays are authentic given the demonstration of your written and your verbal skills on your standardized testing. The next question is about volunteer experience for engineers. Is the lack of volunteering a red flag? Can taking it up a few months before the application deadlines help? What I would say is that the lack of volunteer experience is not necessarily a red flag. The lack of doing anything is a red flag. If you haven't been volunteering or you haven't done any community service, what have you been doing? And if you haven't been doing anything, then that's going to be a bigger red flag than the fact that you haven't done any community service or volunteer work. So if you haven't done the community service or the volunteer work, hopefully you've done something else. And something that's aligned with your future career interests can be quite beneficial as well. But doing something or starting an activity a couple of months before the application process can come across as pretty disingenuous. Admissions officers are going to see when you started that activity involvement, and if that activity involvement was 3 months before you decided to apply to business school, they're probably going to know why you why you got involved in that activity when you did. So hopefully there's other activities that you've been involved in. And if not, then talk about how you've spent your time outside of work, whether in a personal or other kind of extracurricular activity pursuit. The question came in, how do we offset a low GPA as well as a low GMAT score? If you've got a low GPA and a low GMAT score, you've got one of two options. The first is to realign your expectations about what type of business school you're going to be admitted to, or you can take additional remedial coursework. For example, you can take a finance or accounting or economics class at a local community college. You can take it at a private university. You can take it online, and you can do well in that type of course. If you do that frequently enough, you can then in turn write in an optional essay how you feel that your standardized test score is not representative of your analytical and your quantitative skills because you're not a good standardized test taker, and in your undergraduate career you had some difficulty because of X, Y, and Z, and you feel that your coursework and the grades that you've earned in those courses most recently are reflective of your abilities. But it is definitely a tough spot. Low GPA, low GMAT, there's not a heck of a lot else for admissions officers to work off of unless you've taken some remedial courses locally or online, and you can point to those as being more reflective of your actual abilities. Question here is how much significant is international experience for an engineer, even if it's 3 to 4 months? Not sure how much significant is. So in terms of international experience, work experience, it's a nice thing to have, but it's certainly not something that's necessary in order for you to apply to business schools in the U.S. If you have worked abroad, if you have worked in the U.S., that's something that can be very beneficial to show admissions officers, because then it'll mitigate any concerns that they have about your ability to assimilate into a different culture, an ability to assimilate into a different educational or academic environment. So if you've had that international experience, certainly talk about that. But if you haven't, I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to be that big of an issue that you need to worry about. Next question is, how much importance is given to total work experience by admissions officers? Well, you see typically like on average 3 to 5 years of work experience is about on par with most of these top business schools. Some of them are a little bit less, some of them are a little bit more. If you're falling around within that range, that's fine. If you're falling significantly above or below, that's something that you're going to need to address. If you are falling below the average, then you're going to need to demonstrate a certain level of maturity in explaining why you feel like you're ready to go to business school at this point in your career and a certain focus. Similarly, if you're falling on the far end of that average, you're going to need to talk about why it's taking you so long to figure out that you want to go to business school in order to achieve your goals. So it's nice to hit the average. If you're a little above, a little bit below, that's okay, but definitely be thinking about how you're going to address that in your application materials. Another question came in, and might have time for this one and perhaps one final, or perhaps this one, it could be the last depending on how long it takes me to reply. The question is about extracurriculars matching up with an applicant's background. This is, for instance, would an admissions committee look more positively on an engineer who volunteered with a local school science program or one who provided health care in a third world country? They don't really care where you volunteer. I mean, if you volunteer in an industry in which you're interested in going into, then that works. If you want to go into healthcare, for example, then volunteering to provide healthcare in a third world country would probably be looked more favorably upon than going to work at a local school science program. If you're more interested in so aligning your volunteer work, aligning your extracurricular activities and interests with your future career interests, that's a good way to demonstrate that that focus. But if you don't have it, then that's okay too. Last question, and then unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up, is how beneficial can a strong GMAT score be toward getting financial aid and scholarships? Now typically with financial aid and scholarships, admissions officers are looking for, and financial aid offices I should say, are looking for applicants whose academic qualifications are quite a bit higher than the average incoming student, because they're offering financial aid and scholarships as a means of attracting you to attend their program over other perhaps better ranked or more competitive programs that you're likely going to be admitted to given your prior work experience and your academic qualifications. So if you are targeting programs that are going to offer you stronger financial aid packages or additional merit-based scholarships, then set your expectations a little bit below that of what the average incoming student typically looks like. So apply to those schools where you're a little bit stronger than that student, or a lot stronger, and hopefully the schools will offer you that type of aid in order to get you to enroll there over other programs. So that is all the time that we have for today. I just want to again remind all of you to, if you're interested, sign up for an admissions assessment with an AcceptU former admissions officer to download this presentation. Those links are up on your screen now. Appreciate you all taking the time to attend today's webinar. Great questions, and hope to see you all on a future Beat the GMAT webinar with AcceptU in the future. Thanks so much and have a great day.